Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the New Horizon, staring at the massive ships that had appeared on their screens just minutes ago. The alien fleet stretched across space like a wall of metal and lights. Each ship was at least 3 times bigger than his vessel, and there were dozens of them. "Sir, we're getting a transmission," said Lisa Parker from her position at the communications console. Her voice was steady, but Jake could hear the nervousness underneath. This was humanity's first contact with alien life, and nobody knew what to expect. "Put it through," Jake ordered, straightening his uniform. Behind him, Science Officer Kevin Huang was already scanning the alien ships with every sensor they had. The main screen flickered, and suddenly they were looking at something that made Jake blink hard. The alien that appeared on screen was about 3 feet tall, covered in purple fur, and wearing what looked like golden armor that was far too big for its small body. Large round eyes stared at them with what was probably meant to be a fierce expression. "Attention, puny flesh creatures of the pathetic human race," the alien began, its voice squeaky but trying to sound deep and threatening. "I am the mighty ZYX Thaler, the terrible, supreme commander of the Galactic Dominion's first Terra fleet." Kevin made a small choking sound from his station. Jake shot him a warning look. "You will listen to my words of doom and despair." ZYX Thaler continued, raising one tiny furred hand dramatically. "Your species has dared to venture into space controlled by the all-powerful Galactic Dominion. This is a crime that cannot go unpunished." Lisa covered her mouth with her hand, her shoulders shaking slightly. The alien's translator was working, but something about the way it spoke made everything sound like lines from a bad movie. "We are the masters of 1,000 worlds," ZYX Thaler declared, his voice getting higher as he got more excited. "We have crushed armies beneath our mighty boots. We have made entire planets weep with terror at the sound of our names." "Captain," Kevin whispered, trying to keep his voice steady, "their ships, the readings are very strange." "Not now, Kevin," Jake whispered back, still watching the screen. "You have exactly 1 solar rotation to surrender completely to our magnificent greatness," the alien commander continued. "Send your most cowering leaders to our home world, where they will kneel before our supreme emperor and beg for mercy that will not be given." Jake opened his mouth to respond diplomatically, but ZYX Thaler wasn't finished. "If you refuse, we will unleash weapons of such terrible power that your son will cry. Your planets will run away in fear. Your children will forget how to laugh because of the darkness we will bring." That was too much for Lisa. She let out a small snort of laughter, then quickly covered her mouth with both hands, her eyes wide with horror at what she had just done. ZYX Thaler paused, his large eyes getting even bigger. "Ah, I see our terrible presence has already begun to affect your minds. You show the first signs of terror madness." No, Jake said quickly, stepping forward. "Commander ZYX Thaler, we mean no disrespect. We would be honored to discuss terms with your magnificent empire." "Of course you would," ZYX Thaler said, puffing out his small chest. "Our power is so great that it makes all species want to talk instead of fight. You are wise to fear us properly." Kevin was now shaking with suppressed laughter, pretending to study his instruments very carefully. Jake could see other crew members around the bridge struggling to keep straight faces. "Your terror response pleases me," ZYX Thaler continued. "Some of your kind are already showing the shaking that comes from seeing true power. This is good. This means you understand what you face." "We understand perfectly," Jake managed to say, though his voice was a bit strained. "Excellent. You will send representatives to the world of Dominax Prime within 7 rotations. They will come to witness the ceremony of absolute submission. There, they will see wonders and terrors beyond their tiny mind's ability to comprehend." The transmission cut off, leaving the bridge in complete silence for about 3 seconds. Then Lisa burst into laughter, followed immediately by Kevin and half the bridge crew. "Did you see his little armor?" Lisa gasped between laughs. It was like a child playing dress-up. "The way he talked," Kevin added, wiping tears from his eyes, "like he learned English from watching old action movies." Jake held up his hand for quiet, though he was fighting his own smile. "People, this is still first contact with an alien species. We need to take this seriously." "But, sir," Lisa said, getting control of herself, "did you see their ships?" "Kevin, What did your scan show? Kevin looked at his readings and started laughing again. Captain, I think you need to see this. Their terror fleet appears to be held together with some kind of metallic tape, and their weapons, well, they look more like fireworks than actual weapons. Jake stared at the data Kevin was showing him. This was going to be a very interesting first contact indeed. 3 hours after the first contact, Captain Jake Morrison sat in his ready room reading reports that made the situation even more confusing. Kevin Huang had spent the entire time scanning the alien fleet, and what he found was almost unbelievable. Captain, you need to see this, Kevin said as he entered the room with a tablet full of data. I've been studying their ships very carefully. These readings can't be right, but I've checked them 5 times. Jake looked at the information Kevin was showing him. Are you telling me their weapons are fake? Not fake exactly, but they're not designed to hurt anything. Look at this. Kevin pointed to a diagram on his screen. Their main guns seem to be built to make bright lights and loud noises. It's like they took fireworks and made them really, really big. Before Jake could respond, Lisa's voice came over the communication system. Captain, we're getting another transmission from Commander ZYX Thaler. Jake sighed and walked back to the bridge. The alien commander appeared on screen again, somehow looking even more pleased with himself than before. Greetings again, frightened humans. ZYX Thaler announced. I see that 3-time period had passed, and you have not tried to run away. This shows that our terrifying presence has frozen you with fear, exactly as expected. Jake noticed that several more aliens had joined ZYX Thaler on the screen. They all looked similar to their commander, small and furry, wearing armor that seemed too big for them. One of them was holding what appeared to be a clipboard. Allow me to introduce my Terror Council. ZYX Thaler continued. This is Subcommander Velnok the Frightening and Battle Leader Kixmar the Dreadful. The 2 other aliens stepped forward and tried to look menacing. Velnok was so small that his helmet kept sliding down over his eyes, while Kixmar's armor made squeaking noises every time he moved. We have been discussing your species, ZYX Thaler said. Your terror-shaking and fear sounds from before have shown us that humans are properly afraid of true power. This is good. Lisa made a small noise that might have been a laugh, but she quickly turned it into a cough. However, ZYX Thaler continued, we must test your fear levels more completely. Therefore, we will now demonstrate one of our lesser weapons of doom. On the screen, the aliens moved to what looked like a control panel covered in blinking lights. ZYX Thaler pressed a large red button with both hands, grunting with effort. Outside the New Horizon, one of the alien ships began to glow with bright purple light. Then it started making a sound that could only be described as the loudest doorbell in the universe. The light show continued for about 30 seconds, with different colors flashing in patterns that hurt to look at. Behold! ZYX Thaler shouted over the noise. The weapon of mild inconvenience. This is only a tiny taste of our true power. When the light show ended, Jake realized that absolutely nothing had happened to his ship. Kevin was checking his instruments frantically, but there was no damage, no energy drain, nothing at all. Did you feel the terrible effects? ZYX Thaler asked eagerly. Are your mind filled with dismay at seeing such mighty forces? Jake looked around his bridge. Half his crew was trying not to laugh, while the other half looked completely confused. It was very impressive, Jake said carefully. Yes, I can see the fear in your voice. ZYX Thaler said happily. You tried to hide it, but we know the signs of proper terror. Your species is reacting exactly as all species should when faced with a galactic dominion. Behind ZYX Thaler, Subcommander Velnok was writing something on his clipboard and nodding seriously. Now we will make our final demand, ZYX Thaler continued. Your world must send its most cowering representatives to our home planet. They will participate in the ceremony of absolute submission, where they will see wonders that will make their minds break with awe. Jake was starting to understand that these aliens really believed they were being intimidating. Somehow, they had completely misunderstood how humans were reacting to them. We will consider sending representatives, Jake said, but we would need to know more about the ceremony. Excellent. Your desire to know more shows that you are already beginning to submit to our greatness. ZYX Thaler said. The ceremony will take place in our fortress of eternal doom, where our Supreme Emperor Vexnaren the Unspeakable will decide the fate of your entire species. Kevin was now pretending to have a coughing fit to cover his laughter. Lisa was biting her lip so hard that Jake was worried she might hurt herself. Your representatives must be your most important leaders, ZYX Thaler continued. They must come ready to beg for mercy and offer tribute to our magnificence. Do not send anyone who is not properly afraid, or the ceremony will not work correctly. We understand, Jake said. We will send our best diplomats. Good. You have 7 rotations to prepare them for the journey to Dominax Prime. Make sure they practice proper cowering before they arrive. The transmission ended, leaving the bridge quiet except for the sound of people trying very hard not to laugh out loud. So, Lisa said finally, I think we need to warn Earth Command about this situation. Jake nodded. Yes, but how exactly do we explain that we made first contact with aliens who think they are scary but are actually adorable? Ambassador Roy Campbell took a deep breath as their shuttle approached the alien homeworld. Beside him, Cultural Specialist Amy Rodriguez was studying her notes about what they might expect, while Colonel Dan Foster checked his equipment one more time. Earth had decided that this diplomatic mission was too important to mess up, even if the aliens seemed harmless. Remember, Roy said to his team, we need to take this seriously. These beings might seem funny to us, but they control a large part of space. We can't afford to offend them. The shuttle landed with a bump on what the aliens called their landing pad of approaching doom. Through the windows, they could see a group of aliens waiting for them. Each one was wearing elaborate armor and carrying what looked like ceremonial weapons. As they stepped out of the shuttle, a tall alien approached them. Well, tall for their species, which meant he was about 4 feet high. His armor was bright gold with purple trim, and he wore a cape that dragged on the ground behind him. Welcome, trembling humans, to Dominax Prime, the alien announced in a voice that squeaked despite his obvious attempt to sound deep and scary. I am General Crixval the Bone Crusher, Supreme Guardian of the Fortress of Eternal Doom. Amy bit her lip to keep from smiling. The general's title was very impressive, but it was hard to take seriously when he had to look up at them and his helmet kept sliding sideways on his head. We are honored to be here, Roy replied with a diplomatic bow. Of course you are. All beings are honored to witness our magnificence. General Crixval said proudly, Follow me, and try not to faint from terror as we show you the awesome power of our empire. They were led through what the aliens clearly considered to be an intimidating entrance. The doors were huge and black, with spikes sticking out in all directions. Dramatic music was playing from hidden speakers, the kind of music that sounded like it came from a monster movie. Behold the corridor of infinite dread. General Crixval announced as they walked through a long hallway, then looked around carefully. The corridor was indeed very long, but it seemed to serve no practical purpose except to look scary. The walls were covered with paintings of aliens in dramatic poses, and every few feet there were statues of what were probably meant to be terrifying creatures but looked more like cute monsters from a children's cartoon. This is very impressive, Amy said, and she wasn't completely lying. Someone had put a lot of work into making this place look as frightening as possible. Yes, many species have collapsed with fear just from walking through this corridor, the general said happily. Some of them were so scared that they agreed to join our empire immediately. As they walked deeper into the fortress, Roy began to notice something strange. Every alien guard they passed spoke in dramatic one-liners that sounded like they came from old action movies. None shall pass without proper fear, one guard announced as they walked by. Tremble before the might of the Dominion, called another. Your terror feeds our power, shouted a third. Amy was taking notes frantically. This was the strangest alien culture she had ever encountered, and she was starting to form a theory about what was happening here. Finally, they reached what General Crixval called the throne room of ultimate display. The doors opened to reveal a massive room decorated in black and red, with dramatic lighting that cast scary shadows everywhere. At the far end sat a figure on an enormous throne that looked like it was made from the bones of some giant creature. Behold, General Crixval whispered dramatically, the Supreme Emperor Vexnaren the Unspeakable. The figure on the throne stood up slowly, and Roy saw that he was the tallest alien they had met so far, which meant he was almost 5 feet high. He wore a black cape that was so long it pulled around the base of his throne, and a crown that seemed to be made of metal spikes and glowing gems. "So," Emperor Vexnaren said in a voice that was trying very hard to sound threatening, "these are the humans who dare to enter our domain without proper cowering." "Your terribleness," General Crixval said, bowing so low that his helmet fell off. "They have shown appropriate fear responses during their journey here." Emperor Vexnaren stepped down from his throne and walked toward them. As he got closer, Roy could see that the Emperor's armor was covered with buttons and switches that blinked with different color lights. "Humans," the Emperor said, pointing at them dramatically, "you will now witness the true power of the Galactic Dominion. Prepare your minds for terror beyond imagination." He pressed a large red button on his chest armor. Immediately, the room filled with flashing lights, loud sound effects, and artificial fog that smelled like vanilla. Mechanical arms came down from the ceiling, waving around harmlessly while making whooshing noises. "This is our ultimate weapon of fear," Emperor Vexnaren shouted over the noise. "Does it not fill your hearts with despair?" Dan was struggling so hard not to laugh that his face was turning red. Amy was writing in her notebook so fast that her pen was smoking. Roy maintained his diplomatic expression, but inside he was starting to understand what they were really dealing with. When the light show finally ended, Emperor Vexnaren looked at them expectantly. "Well, are you not amazed by our terrible power?" "It's certainly very impressive, Your Majesty," Roy said carefully. "We've never seen anything quite like it." "Excellent. I can see the fear in your eyes," the Emperor said happily. "Tomorrow we will begin the ceremony of absolute submission, where you will witness even greater wonders." As they were led to their guest quarters, Amy whispered to Roy, "I think I know what's happening here. These aliens learned about intimidation from our old TV shows." The next morning, Ambassador Roy Campbell woke up in what the aliens called the guest chambers of creeping dread. The room was decorated with dark colors and scary pictures, but the bed was surprisingly comfortable, and someone had left a basket of fruit that looked like purple apples. Amy Rodriguez was already awake, sitting at a desk and writing notes. "Roy, you need to hear my theory," she said as soon as she saw him. "I've been thinking about this all night." Before Roy could answer, Colonel Dan Foster knocked on their door. "We need to talk," he said as he entered. "I spent some time with their guards yesterday, and what I learned is very interesting." "Tell me," Roy said, pouring himself some water from a pitcher that was shaped like a scary monster but held perfectly normal water. "Their entire military is trained in something they call combat posturing," Dan explained. "They spend months learning how to stand in threatening positions and shout dramatic battle cries. But they don't actually know how to fight." Amy nodded excitedly. "That supports my theory. I think these aliens learned everything they know about being scary from our old television shows. Somehow, our entertainment broadcast reached their planet, and they thought they were watching documentaries about how to be properly intimidating." Roy sat down heavily. "You're saying they learned how to be villains from watching our movies?" "Exactly," Amy said. "Think about it. Everything they do sounds like dialogue from bad action films. Their weapons are designed to look scary but not actually hurt anyone. Their whole culture is based on intimidation techniques that only work in movies." A soft chime sounded, and General Crixval's voice came through a speaker shaped like a skull. "Honored guests, it is time for the morning ceremony of building terror. Please prepare your minds for increasing levels of fear." They were escorted to a large courtyard where hundreds of alien soldiers were gathered. Emperor Vexnaren stood on a platform wearing an even more elaborate costume than the day before. "Behold," the Emperor announced, "today you will witness the training of our mighty army. Watch as they demonstrate the combat techniques that have conquered the galaxy." What followed was the strangest military demonstration Roy had ever seen. The alien soldiers went through elaborate routines that involved a lot of dramatic posing, shouting, and weapon waving, but no actual combat training. They would run at straw targets while yelling things like "feel the bite of doom" and "your defeat is inevitable," but their weapons were clearly designed for show rather than effectiveness. One soldier's demonstration involved spinning around 3 times while shouting, "Beware the whirlwind of destruction," before gently poking a target with a weapon that looked like a glowing stick. Dan whispered to Roy, "This is not a real army. These are actors who think they are soldiers." The demonstration continued for an hour, with each group of soldiers showing off different battle techniques that all involved more shouting than actual skill. Finally, Emperor Vexnaren called for the grand finale. "Now you will see our most elite warriors perform the ultimate combat display," he announced. A group of aliens in extra fancy armor took the field. They began what appeared to be a carefully choreographed dance, complete with dramatic leaps, spinning movements, and synchronized weapon flourishes. It was actually quite beautiful to watch, but it was clearly more performance art than military training. "Magnificent!" Emperor Vexnaren shouted. "Does this not strike terror into your hearts?" Roy opened his mouth to give a diplomatic answer, but Amy suddenly burst into applause. "That was amazing," she said enthusiastically. "The coordination, the artistry, the sheer spectacle of it." The Emperor beamed with pride. "You see? Even these brave humans cannot hide there when faced with true Dominion power." But Amy's reaction seemed to confuse some of the aliens. General Crixval approached Roy with a worried expression. "Ambassador," he whispered, "your companion shows the wrong kind of fear response. She seems pleased instead of terrified. This has never happened before." Roy realized they had reached a critical moment. "General, may I ask you something? When your people first learned about intimidation techniques, where did that knowledge come from?" The general looked uncomfortable. "That is ancient history. Long ago, our ancestors received great wisdom from across the stars. Messages that showed them how proper fear-inducing should be done. Messages from across the stars." Amy asked, her eyes lighting up. "Yes," General Crixval said proudly. "Sacred broadcasts that taught us the ways of true power. We learned from the great teachers like Chuck Norris the Terrible and Arnold the Destroyer." Amy and Roy exchanged glances. Their theory was correct. "General," Roy said carefully, "what if I told you that those broadcasts were not actually instruction manuals?" The general's large eyes got even bigger. "What do you mean?" "Of course they were instructional. They showed us how mighty warriors should behave, how proper villains should speak, how fear should be created in enemies." "But what if they were just stories?" Amy asked gently. "Entertainment, not education." General Crixval looked at them as if they had just suggested that the sky was actually purple. "Impossible. Why would anyone create false images of power? That makes no sense." Emperor Vexnaren had noticed their conversation and approached them. "What are you discussing with my general?" he demanded. Roy took a deep breath. This was the moment that would determine whether first contact would be a success or a disaster. "Your Majesty," he said, "we need to have a very important conversation about those ancient broadcasts your people received." Back on Earth, Admiral Helen Brooke stood in the command center watching the biggest alien fleet humanity had ever seen appear on their screens. The reports from Ambassador Campbell's team had been confusing, but Earth's leaders decided they couldn't take any chances with an alien invasion. "How many ships are we looking at?" Admiral Brooks asked her aide, Lieutenant Commander Sa Lee. "Over 200 vessels, Admiral," Sa replied, checking her instruments. "They are broadcasting on all frequencies, demanding our surrender." Dr. Peter Chen, the head of Earth's Alien Technology Research Team, was studying the readings from his position at a nearby console. "Admiral, these energy signatures are very strange. The ships are definitely alien, but their weapon systems don't match what we'd expect from a real invasion force." On the main screen, the image of Commander ZYX Thaler appeared, looking even more dramatic than before. He was now wearing a cape that seemed to be made of shimmering metal, and his armor had twice as many blinking lights as the last time they saw him. "People of Earth," ZYX Thaler announced in his squeaky voice, "your time of reckoning has arrived. We have come to claim your world for the Galactic Dominion." Admiral Brooks stepped forward. "This is Admiral Brooks of the Earth Defense Force. We're prepared to discuss terms." "Terms?" ZYX Thaler laughed, a sound like a squeaky toy being stepped on. "There are no terms. You will surrender completely or face the terrible consequences of defying our might." Behind ZYX Thaler, dozens of other aliens could be seen running around what appeared to be their command center. They were all shouting dramatic phrases and pressing buttons that made lots of lights flash but didn't seem to do anything else. "Behold our invasion formation Alpha." ZYX Thaler continued. "We will now demonstrate why resistance is futile." The alien ships began moving into what was clearly a planned formation. They arranged themselves in elaborate patterns that spelled out words in their language, while broadcasting what sounded like the most dramatic music ever composed. Captain Jake Morrison, who had been promoted to lead the defense fleet, watched from his new command ship alongside pilots Tony Martinez and Lieutenant Commander Sarah Lee's sister, Maria Lee. "Jake," Tony said over the communication system, "are you seeing what I'm seeing? These ships are flying in formation, but they're not actually pointing their weapons at us." "I see it," Jake replied. "It's like they are putting on a show instead of preparing for battle." Dr. Chen's voice came through on the emergency frequency. "All ships, be advised. I'm detecting massive energy buildups in the alien fleet, but the energy patterns don't match any known weapon types." Suddenly, the entire alien fleet lit up like a fireworks display. Bright lights of every color imaginable began flashing in synchronized patterns, while the aliens broadcast what could only be described as the loudest, most dramatic sound effects ever created. The light show went on for 10 minutes. Ships spun in circles while shooting colorful beams of light that seemed designed to look impressive rather than cause damage. Some ships even released what appeared to be glitter into space. "Is this supposed to be an attack?" Maria asked over the radio. Captain Morrison was checking his instruments frantically. "I'm not detecting any damage to our ships. In fact, I'm not detecting any weapons fire at all." When the light show finally ended, Commander ZYX Theta reappeared on screen, looking very pleased with himself. "Did you witness the awesome power of the Dominion?" he asked proudly. "That was only a small demonstration. If you do not surrender immediately, we will be forced to use our even more terrible weapons." Admiral Brooks looked at Dr. Chen, who shrugged helplessly. "Admiral, I have no idea what just happened, but it definitely wasn't an attack." "Commander ZYX Theta," Admiral Brooks said, "we need to understand your intentions. Are you planning to harm our people?" "Harm?" ZYX Theta looked confused. "Why would we harm you?" "Once you properly surrender and show the correct amount of cowering, you will become part of our glorious empire. Then you will help us spread our magnificence to other worlds." "But what if we don't want to surrender?" Admiral Brooks asked. ZYX Theta's expression became very serious. "Then we will have to use the weapon of ultimate persuasion." Another light show began, this one even more elaborate than the first. However, halfway through the display, something went wrong. One of the alien ships started spinning out of control, apparently caught in its own light beam. Two other ships collided while trying to perform some kind of synchronized movement. "Uh-oh," ZYX Theta said, his dramatic voice becoming normal for a moment. "Battle Leader Kixmar, turn off the spinning lights of doom before someone gets hurt." Captain Morrison watched in amazement as several human rescue ships automatically moved to help the aliens who were having trouble with their own weapons. The alien crew seemed grateful for the help, but also very embarrassed. "Admiral," Jake reported, "3 alien ships have requested emergency assistance. Their own light show seems to have damaged their navigation systems." Dr. Chen was laughing now. "Admiral, I think I understand what's happening here. These aren't weapons at all. They are some kind of elaborate intimidation display, but the aliens built them so fancy that they're actually dangerous to operate." Admiral Brooks rubbed her forehead. "So we're being invaded by aliens who are more likely to hurt themselves than us." "It appears that way, Admiral." On screen, Commander ZYX Theta was trying to regain his composure. "This minor technical difficulty does not change anything. We are still here to accept your surrender." "Commander," Admiral Brooks said, "perhaps we should discuss the situation with your diplomatic team on your home world." "Our diplomatic team?" ZYX Theta looked confused again. "You mean the humans who came to witness our power? They should be cowering in our fortress of eternal doom right now." Admiral Brooks had a sudden terrible thought. "Commander, are our people safe?" "Of course they are safe," ZYX Theta said proudly. "They are our honored guests. We would never harm beings who show proper respect for our magnificence." Admiral Brooks looked around her command center at all the confused faces staring back at her. This was definitely not the alien invasion anyone had been expecting. Back on the alien homeworld, Ambassador Roy Campbell sat across from Emperor Vex Naren in what the aliens called a chamber of serious discussions. Amy Rodriguez had her notebook ready, while Colonel Dan Foster was trying to look diplomatic despite everything they had learned. "Your Majesty," Roy began carefully, "we need to talk about those ancient broadcasts your people received from space." Emperor Vex Naren leaned forward on his elaborate throne. "Yes, the sacred transmissions of power. They taught us everything we know about proper intimidation and fear creation." Amy opened her notebook and pulled out some pictures she had printed from her computer. "Your Majesty, these are images from some of our old television shows. Do any of them look familiar?" The Emperor's large eyes grew even bigger as he looked at the pictures. "By the great darkness, these are images of the master teachers. Chuck Norris the Terrible, Arnold the Destroyer, Stallone the Magnificent." "Your Majesty," Roy said gently, "those weren't real warriors. They were actors, people who pretend to be other people for entertainment." The Emperor stared at him as if he had just said the sky was green. Pretend? But they showed such perfect techniques for creating fear. Their speeches were so powerful, their weapons so mighty. Amy leaned forward. "Your Majesty, on our world, we create stories for fun. We make movies and television shows to entertain people, not to teach them how to be scary." General Crixval, who had been listening from the side of the room, made a small choking sound. But if they were not real, then how did they know the proper ways of intimidation? "They didn't," Dan said. "They were just acting, following scripts written by other people who were also just trying to tell exciting stories." The Emperor stood up suddenly, his cape dragging behind him. "This cannot be true. Our entire civilization is based on the wisdom from those transmissions. Our military training, our diplomatic protocols, our methods of expansion, everything comes from the sacred transmissions." Roy could see that they were reaching a crisis point. "Your Majesty, how did your people conquer other worlds if your methods don't actually work?" Emperor Vex Naren began pacing back and forth, his armor making small beeping sounds with each step. "We would arrive at new worlds and demonstrate our terrible power. The local populations would immediately surrender and beg to join our empire." "But did they actually seem afraid?" Amy asked. "Or did they seem confused?" The Emperor stopped pacing. "Now that you mention it, many of them did ask very strange questions. They wanted to know why we were putting on light shows instead of using real weapons. Some of them seemed to think we were performers rather than conquerors." General Crixval nodded slowly, "And several species asked if they could record our demonstrations because they found them entertaining." "Your Majesty," Roy said, "I think the other alien species in your empire joined you because they were confused, not because they were afraid. They probably thought you were harmless and decided it was easier to agree with you than to try to explain the misunderstanding." The Emperor sat down heavily on his throne. "But we practiced for so many years. We perfected every technique from the sacred transmissions. We built the most impressive weapons, created the most frightening fortresses, developed the most terror-inducing ceremonies." Amy showed him another picture. "Your Majesty, this is from a movie called The Villain's Handbook, How to Look Scary. It was meant to be a comedy. People watched it to laugh." "Laugh?" The Emperor's voice became very small. "People were supposed to laugh at the intimidation techniques." "Yes," Amy said gently. "The whole point was that the villains in the movie were so over the top that they became funny instead of scary." Emperor Vex Naren buried his face in his hands. "We have spent 300 years building an empire based on comedy techniques." Dr. Chen's voice suddenly came through on Roy's communication device. "Ambassador Campbell, are you there? We have some important information from our analysis of the alien technology." Roy activated his communicator. "Go ahead, Dr. Chen." "So, we've been studying the wreckage from the alien ships that had accidents during their light show. Their technology is actually quite advanced, but it's all been modified to create visual effects instead of practical applications. It's like they took genuinely powerful technology and turned it into the most expensive fireworks display in the galaxy." Amy was writing frantically in her notebook. "Dr. Chen, this confirms our theory. These aliens had the technology to be genuinely powerful, but they modified everything to match what they saw in our entertainment broadcasts." Emperor Vexnaren looked up with an expression of growing horror. Are you telling me that we could have been a real galactic power, but instead we became a traveling circus? Not a circus, Your Majesty, Roy said diplomatically. More like performance artists. Very dedicated performance artists. The Emperor stood up again, but this time he didn't look dramatic. He just looked tired. 300 years of my people's history. 300 years of building an empire based on misunderstood comedy shows. General Crixval cleared his throat nervously. Your Majesty, what do we do now? Our entire invasion fleet is currently orbiting the human homeworld, waiting for orders. Roy's communicator crackled again. Ambassador, this is Admiral Brooks. We need to know the status of your negotiations. Commander ZYX Thaler is demanding that we surrender, but half his fleet is asking us for technical assistance with their light show equipment. Emperor Vexnaren looked at Roy with an expression that was part embarrassment and part hope. Ambassador Campbell, is there any way we can resolve this situation without everyone in the galaxy finding out how foolish we are being? Roy smiled. Your Majesty, I think we can work something out. But first, we need to help you figure out what your people actually want to accomplish, now that you know the truth about those broadcasts. 6 months later, Ambassador Roy Campbell stood on the observation deck of the newly renamed Cultural Exchange Station, watching human and alien children play together in the station's Central Park. The sight still made him smile, especially when he saw young aliens trying to teach human children how to do their dramatic poses, while the human kids showed them how to play simple games like tag. Amy Rodriguez approached him carrying a tablet full of reports. Roy, you should see the latest update from the Joint Technology Committee. The aliens have figured out how to convert their light show weapons into the most advanced communication system in the galaxy. That's wonderful, Roy said. What about the military exchange program? Colonel Foster says it's going better than expected, Amy replied. The aliens are excellent at coordination and teamwork. Once they learned actual combat techniques instead of dramatic posing, they became quite skilled, and our people are learning their advanced engineering methods. Through the viewing window, they could see the alien homeworld in the distance. The planet looked very different now. The Fortress of Eternal Doom had been converted into the cultural center of galactic understanding, and the dramatic black spikes had been replaced with colorful banners representing all the species in their alliance. Emperor Vexnaren, who now preferred to be called President Vex, walked up to join them. He was wearing much simpler clothes now, though he still had a small cape because he said it made him feel confident. Ambassador Campbell, President Vex said, I wanted to thank you again for helping us solve our identity crisis without losing face with the other species in our alliance. Roy smiled. Your solution was brilliant, President Vex. Telling everyone that the Dominion was transitioning from a military empire to a cultural alliance was much better than admitting the whole thing was based on a misunderstanding. Amy looked up from her tablet. The other species seemed to be relieved. Actually, several of them have admitted that they never understood why you insisted on all those dramatic ceremonies, but they went along with it because they thought it was some kind of religious requirement. The Zephyrians said they actually enjoyed the light shows, President Vex added. They want us to keep doing them, but now as entertainment rather than intimidation. Captain Jake Morrison's voice came over the communication system. Ambassador Campbell, we're receiving a transmission from the exploration ship New Discovery. They've made contact with another species that claims to be masters of the universe. Roy, Amy, and President Vex all looked at each other with expressions of concern and amusement. Please tell me they're not basing their culture on our old cartoon shows, Amy said. I'll prepare a cultural analysis team, Roy said with a sigh. This might become a regular problem as we explore more of the galaxy. President Vex chuckled, a sound that was much more pleasant than his old evil laugh. At least now we know how to handle these situations. The first step is always to ask them where they learned their intimidation techniques. Dr. Peter Chen joined them, carrying a device that looked like a combination of human and alien technology. The joint research project is ready for its first test, he announced. We've successfully combined our computer systems with their advanced materials to create something that neither species could have built alone. What does it do? Roy asked. It's a universal translator that doesn't just convert words, but also explain cultural context, Dr. Chen said proudly. It should prevent future misunderstandings like the one we had with the Dominion. Amy was excited. That could revolutionize galactic diplomacy. No more species thinking that entertainment broadcasts are instruction manuals. President Vex nodded. We've already shared the story of our misunderstanding with several other species. It turns out that cultural confusion is much more common than anyone realized. The Klaxons thought that our cooking shows were military training videos, and the Vortons have been trying to learn human social customs from our soap operas. At least soap operas are closer to real human behavior than action movies, Roy said, though I shudder to think what they learned from them. A chime sounded, and General Crixval's voice came through the speakers. He was now the Director of Cultural Education, and much happier in his new role. President Vex, the first class of the Galactic Diplomatic Academy, is ready to graduate. Students from 12 different species have learned to communicate effectively without relying on intimidation or confusion. Excellent, President Vex replied. And how is the Human Entertainment Education program going? Very well, sir. All species now understand the difference between fiction and reality. Though I must say, several species have requested that we keep showing the action movies because they find them genuinely entertaining. Roy laughed. I suppose there's nothing wrong with enjoying a good action movie, as long as you know it's not a documentary. Amy closed her tablet and looked out at the peaceful scene in the park. You know, Roy, I think we accidentally discovered something important here. Most conflict between species might be based on misunderstandings rather than real differences. The Cultural Exchange Station is proof of that, Roy agreed. When species actually understand each other, they get along remarkably well. President Vex adjusted his small cape and smiled. My people spent 300 years trying to be something we thought we should be, instead of figuring out what we actually wanted to be. Now that we know we're good at organization, engineering, and creating beautiful displays, we're much happier. A group of young aliens ran past a viewing window, followed by human children who were all wearing tiny capes and practicing dramatic poses. The sight made all three adults smile. The next generation won't have these problems, Amy observed. They are growing up understanding each other from the beginning. Roy nodded. And who knows? Maybe they'll be the ones to figure out how to prevent the next species we meet from thinking our cooking shows are warfare manuals. President Vex laughed. In the meantime, I should probably go prepare for the ceremony where we officially welcome the Klaxons into our alliance. They are very excited about it, though they still insist on bringing their own dramatic music. As President Vex walked away, his small cape fluttering behind him, Roy and Amy continued to watch the children play. The sight of different species learning from each other and having fun together was perhaps the best outcome anyone could have hoped for from humanity's first contact with the galaxy. Amy, Roy said, make a note for the next diplomatic mission. Step 1. Ask them about their entertainment preferences before we accidentally teach them to be supervillains. Amy laughed and made the note. Step 2. Bring plenty of popcorn. If we're going to watch alien interpretations of human culture, we might as well enjoy the show.